Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Have a Life Teaching podcast. When I was a principal, central office called me one day and said, the local university has some student tutors. Do you want to participate in this program? It starts tomorrow and it lasts for 2 months and then it's over. Not having much money, but knowing that a lot of my students could benefit from tutoring, I jumped at the chance. But I don't know, listeners, if I actually did my students any great service. I might have actually turned them completely off to tutoring, them and their families, based on what happened. Student tutors came in from the local university. They came in, they left. There was no consistency of tutors. There was very minimal interaction between my teachers in my building as to what the students actually needed in terms of the specific standards that our students were still not mastering in math or ELA. So the kids would go to the tutoring. The tutor would say, what do you need help with? And they would say math, or they would say ELA. So it really wasn't aligned to what the specific needs were. And the third thing that was off in the tutoring that I was offering was because our tutors were only available at the end of the school day, it totally cut off interest from any family in my school community that had obligations in the afternoon where their students had to be taking care of siblings or doing things with the family. And so it didn't provide an opportunity for those students, nor did it provide an opportunity for students who might have actually learned better in the morning before school. So it wasn't even a tutoring program that was fully integrated within the culture of my school. So for all those reasons, it failed miserably. So while I am sorry that that happened, and I hope that those students have actually recovered from that, I'm really excited today to have a guest with us who can really talk about the ins and outs of tutoring. So I'm really excited to introduce you to Jesse Roselin. He is the CEO and founder of Tutor Corps, a California Bay Area-based organization that provides tutoring supports for individuals and individual families, as well as an organization that partners with schools. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
I like to ask my guests who you are, what's your background, and how did you get into tutoring? Why did this become your jam, if you will?
That's a great question. When I graduated from college, I joined the Teach for America program, and that was a really good entryway into teaching. I got some very good training, and I taught 8th grade for 2 years and got my multiple subject teaching credential. So I really loved teaching. And after my 2-year commitment with TFA, I wanted to continue teaching, but in a slightly different way. I really wanted, when I was in the classroom, I just felt like I never had enough time or resources to meet all the needs of each individual student. I had 30 kids plus some other kids coming in and out. Like we had 2 kids who were pulled in and out of the class. And so it was just a large class, and I had a wide range of learners. So I felt that tutoring would be a really good way to be able to meet those kids. And I also had a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. So I thought it'd be fun to start it as a business as well.
And now, obviously, it's a great business to be in because families want the extra support for their kids. We find ourselves now, though, in an era or a time when your supports, your tutoring services are really needed, particularly post-COVID. So Are you finding, Jesse, that families and individual students are continuing with their tutoring services post COVID? What do you see as the benefit that coaching and tutoring could still provide students?
That's a great question. I really think that now more than ever in the post-COVID era, we're finding the greatest need for one-on-one high dosage tutoring. And the reality is that students are having very specific deficits and they're varied. So when you look at, let's say, a typical fifth grade classroom, during those COVID years, some of those kids might have missed certain concepts. Other kids did get those concepts, and simply the range that the teachers have to deal with is just too extreme. When you look back, say, in a pre-COVID era, yeah, there was a spectrum of learners, but still the teachers were able to cope with that. They had the resources to do that. And now the kids are just so varied and have so many different needs that it's just not that effective to teach a whole class with one particular concept when you have some kids that know that concept, some kids that don't. Having said that, many under-resourced kids have been hit hardest because when you look across America, many of the independent schools actually stayed open during most of COVID, whereas
Right.
many of our public schools, depending on where they were in the country, closed. And so in certain circumstances, some, under-resourced kids really got no education for a long time, like, a year and a half, even 2 years at some situations. So I am really pleased to see the resources put out there by school districts to provide support. And we at Tutor Corps have been providing one-to-one high dosage tutoring. In other words, meeting 2 or 3 hours per week with each student and providing targeted instruction in the specific content areas where they need help, in addition to building study skills, building confidence, teaching executive functioning strategies, things like this.
And I love that you said that, Jesse, because there's a lot to unpack there. One, you were talking about really how the one model fits all for all students doesn't work for all students, given the variety of needs that we see out there post-COVID. I would almost argue, too, it's not even fair to the teacher to expect the teacher to be meeting all of these diverse needs, especially if they're a single teacher in a classroom, right? So, this feeling of being overwhelmed and the need to provide all these supports could also be contributing to teachers leaving the classroom. So the fact that you are providing these 2 to 3 hours of targeted instruction is really helping equity, because again, how do we ensure that the students get the supports they need when their teachers might not be able to give them all that individual support that the student not only needs, but deserves? So this leads me into my next question. If a school was going to bring in an organization like yours, or if a family was going to contract with the tutoring company on their own, what makes a successful tutoring partnership?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And it does bring me back to your introduction where you were talking about many of the challenges as a principal that you faced in terms of integrating the tutoring support at your school site. So I think what makes the tutoring most effective, hands down, is open communication between the parties, whether that's between the family and the teacher, the tutor, or between the school and the tutor. In terms of open communication, there is often a burden of time in that first setting up period. So when you want to get that tutor on board, there's a burden for the teachers or the parent to provide information, data, assessments to the teacher. And that's kind of what you were talking about in the intro, where if you have the tutor coming in and they don't have any background information on where the child's strengths are, where the child's areas of weakness might be, where they might be having deficits in understanding, if, all of those things, if we can get information early on in the first session, ideally, of how generally does this kid learn? Do they have a specific learning style? Do they have any learning differences? Where have they, if it's, are we focusing on a specific subject, multiple subjects? Let's say we're focusing on math. If we're focusing on math, how have they been doing in math? If the classroom teacher is able to provide the last couple assessments that they've done and send them over to the teacher, our tutor, then that allows our tutor to be so much more effective. And then once that pre-work is done, I really don't want to take too much time from the teacher. I really value the teacher's time. I have been a classroom teacher. I know how hard it is to be working with so many kids and trying to provide support and education for so many kids. So we don't want to lean on the teachers, but we want to help basically channel that information back to us. And then periodically, what we're doing is we're providing reports after every session, and those are going out to the family and to the teacher so that the teachers can see exactly what areas we've been working on. And then they can see in the classroom, let's say, we're working on the Pythagorean theorem, we're working on 3, 4, 5 triangles. They have an assessment, a test on that in the classroom. They can see, oh yes, Johnny was working on this with his tutor. I'm seeing it in the classroom that it's working. Or you know what, he still didn't get it. And so if the teacher wants, they can have open communication with us. More often than not, they give us a lot of information up front, and then we're conveying back to the teacher and they can write us as they see fit. Yeah, I think that answers your question.
Yeah. Now, when a tutoring partnership doesn't go right or doesn't go well, what are some of the things that you see contributing to that, and how do we mitigate those problems?
Yeah, I think, two things that come up for me right away are one, goals. So originally, when the tutoring situation starts, if the goals aren't clear, for example, the student is not clear or the school is not clear on what the goals are. Is the goal, are we trying to do math and reading and writing development? Are we trying to do English language arts and mathematics? If that's not conveyed, if it's not clear what the goals are, then that can be a problematic area. The second thing that, again, you talked about originally was continuity. So you can have continuity on the part of the tutor and also in terms of the student, whether they're actually attending the sessions. So with our organization, we have very high retention rate. So we have professional educators, our tutors are coming in and they're sticking with the student at something like a 96% rate for the entire school year.
Oh,
so
nice.
We're having really high retention rates, really high levels of continuity. Now, on the part of the student, we do need student buy-in. So if that student is not showing up for those sessions, if they're missing those tutoring sessions, that's another area where we stumble, where we're not really able to simply deliver the services. And when you look at the very basics of the relationship, it's about knowing what they want to work on and having both the student and the tutor showing up.
Right.
Once you have those two very basic elements, then we can build on the education from there.
Now, when students don't show up, are you seeing, is there a typical reason for that? What do you do when that happens?
Yeah, so originally, when you go back to the beginning, we look at buy-in. Like when the school district is selecting, like if you look at a school district, for example, we have different categories that you're mentioning. One, you have a family that is contracting privately with us, or you have a school district. So if the family is contracting with us privately, you might have a situation where mom or dad really wants the tutor, and then Johnny, 12 years old, 7th grade, just rebellious, pushing against what his parents want, not showing up. And you have to then really work on that relationship. And so I think what we do is we focus on having the tutors talk openly with the student. Like, this is not about your parents. This is about you and me. How can I help you? Do you want help? Let's just really build that mentoring relationship, right? Now, when we look at larger school districts where we're tutoring several hundred kids, we have situations where at the very beginning, the way the protocol is developed for the school district to target individual students is important. So if you have students that are failing out, in multiple classes, and then those kids are targeted for tutoring, you have to parse out, why are those kids doing poorly in those classes. Well, if it's for absenteeism, for lots of tardies, they're simply not showing up, well, it's going to be hard to get them into a reliable tutoring program
Right.
if that is the fundamental reason. So when we talk with school districts, what we do is we set expectations from the beginning, and we help school districts define certain protocols for selecting students. And when they go through students, a student definitely, if the student is failing, like, we want to support them, and we need to have a buy-in or a commitment from that student to show up. And it often helps if we can get the school district buy-in, the student buy-in, and the parent buy-in. Sometimes we're dealing with students with homelessness, foster youth, and in those cases, it's more important than ever for us to connect with the parent or guardian or an older sibling, someone who can help us help the student get them to the tutoring session. Once we build that relationship, the mentoring relationship with that student, then it's more and more likely that that student will want to show up to the sessions.
And that makes total sense to me. And what you also said that I found very appealing about your tutoring services is the fact that you are developing not just the students' academic capabilities, but their executive functioning skills, the social emotional competencies. And that as well, the more students feel empowered, that they have control over their growth and achievement, in my opinion, can only but help to further strengthen that relationship between the student and the tutor. So how do you go about developing the executive functioning skills of the students you tutor along with the academics?
That's a great question. We're really taking a step back and looking at what is going on for the child in that hour, in that day, in that week, in that month. What are the different academic responsibilities, athletic maybe responsibilities, extracurricular responsibilities, and really helping them go from a state of overwhelm and disconnectedness of like, this is just too much, it's too much, to developing a system that works for them. And these days it could be on an online system, an online calendaring system, but for some kids, it's still back to pen and paper on a calendar. Whatever works for them and helps them do it, then we can teach them over time to develop new habits and routines for keeping track of the responsibilities. And especially at that age, it's very hard. It's natural for kids not to have the executive functioning that you and I have, and to not be thinking ahead a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and understanding that, oh, if I have this dress rehearsal for this play, or I have this big track meet, I'm not going to have the time available to study for that test or this test or write this project. So that really helping them drill down and meeting 2 or 3 times a week helps immensely, because then the tutor is keeping track and able to debrief with the student 2 or 3 times per week, looking at the academic goals that they met. How did that last test go? Did you turn in that essay? Did you turn in that project? As well as tracking all the extracurricular, athletic, and other goals that are going on.
Yeah, you hit on something very important there. And we tend to think of tutoring as academics, but you're exactly right. Sometimes it's not that the student doesn't know the academics, it's they're not organized in establishing a study routine or establishing when they are going to study or review, particularly if they are involved in a lot of events and activities. And let's face it, a lot of our students in 2023 are overextended in multiple activities, especially as they move on into middle school and high school, because they want to have that competitive edge getting into university. But the ugly side of that, or the downside of that, is overwhelming or being overwhelmed, and then perhaps not doing as well academically, because again, they don't have those executive functioning skills that you're also teaching students. So I love that your program does that. Now, coming to possibly the end of ESSER funding, in particular for public schools. And a lot of tutoring has been supported or financed through these ESSER funds.
Absolutely.
What would you recommend to school communities to fund these vitally important academic support programs, such as tutoring, as the money pit starts to dry out?
If I kind of put on my thinking cap and just am brainstorming with you here, I have a couple different ideas. If we go back to our original premise that we really want experienced tutors that have a lot of continuity with the kids, and that we have a varied group of learners at different levels, then we're going to see that we don't want to have large classes, extra classes that don't have differentiated instruction toward targeting these different kids. So I think that when money is tight, the general trend is to try and increase the class size so that it costs less on a per pupil basis.
Right.
Now, I think that is short-sighted, and we can move a little bit in that direction. I think you could do small group tutoring. Small group tutoring is effective. It's not as effective as one-on-one,
Right.
but in the absence of, when you're comparing that to no tutoring, I think if you're looking at small group tutoring of 3 to 5 students max, you can still make a very positive difference if you have done assessments or if you're using the data from the teacher or the school that is actually able to group kids according to their knowledge in a specific content area. So if you're having a math class, a reading class, a writing class, whatever it is, and you're able to really systematically group those kids, and if you have kids that are moving, this gets into another sticky area in terms of tracking. But, if those kids are able to move in and out of those groups more fluidly as they understand the concepts, that would be the goal. Now, let's brainstorm a second on one-to-one tutoring. When you looked at the pandemic, there was a general sense that I think a lot of people felt pride in as Americans, whatever side of the aisle you're on, is that, people were there to really try and help one another through this crisis. You have first responders, physicians, ER doctors, nurses, lots of people on the front lines putting themselves at risk to help other people. And now that we're coming to hopefully the long tail of COVID, and we're trying to deal with the aftermath, I think as a country, we still want to have that same conception, like what can we do as Americans to help this young generation of students who have been robbed of their education for this COVID time period. And when we look at options, if there isn't funding from the school district, what else can be done? Can you look to nonprofit organizations like the Boys and Girls Club
Right.
or other similar organizations that could provide tutoring? Can you look to school foundations that might typically fundraise for other areas to do fundraising, maybe short term, looking at a 1 to 2 year horizon for specific funding to fund that gap that has where the money was from state and federal sources for one-to-one tutoring or for small group tutoring, and fill that gap. I think you either can be looking towards the private sector or the nonprofit organizations to fill that, or you can be making some tough choices looking at your school budget as to what you can do for finding another teacher. And then finally, organizing a volunteer effort, I think, could be good too. You have a lot of teachers who were burnt out in the classroom but are still available to tutor online. You mentioned tutoring in the morning before school or tutoring during the day. People do have availability across time zones, and I think it would take a lot of organization, but you could get people interested in volunteering their time as well.
Yeah, and on that note, I know personally that AARP, I guess it's the Association for the Advancement of Retired People, they actually have a reading tutoring program where retired folks go out and support the learning, the reading needs of, I think they're up to now 20, 25 cities. So to your point, Jesse, about how to fund tutoring programs when the money gets tight, there are organizations out there that are making those connections and providing that bridge, if you will, for schools that are struggling financially, and tapping into those resources of those organizations. So that really resonated with me in terms of what you were saying about really the power of partnership and the power of really vesting your community in tutoring, because let's face it, we do also put our money towards what we value, and schools will fund, especially more, modest means or upper economically advantaged schools, in sports programs. But what about our tutoring services, right? Now, urban schools might not even have the luxury of having large after school programs because of the tight budgets that they have. But again, there are those partnerships out there that might support those schools. Another thing you said that I thought was really key is you gave some really good examples of how to use some practices from tutoring that aren't as effective, such as one-on-one tutoring, but you mentioned maybe having small group instruction. So listening to you, I would also recommend teachers implement some of the best practices when it comes to tutoring in how they're actually teaching. When you know that you're a teacher and you have, let's say, 4 different instructional groups in your classroom, no, I'm not expecting teachers to create, 35 different lesson plans for those kids. But what if they do spend some time with, say, 2 to maybe 4 of the lowest level kids and do individual small group instruction with them while the other students work more independently, right? So I would love it if people listening to this podcast, teachers particularly, did even think about how they could implement some best tutoring practices into actual instruction.
That makes a lot of sense. And I just wanted to go back to your point just for a second about the AARP. And what I really like about that is you are relying on very experienced teachers coming in and volunteering their time for these students who need the help. I think it is a fool's errand to try and get college students or maybe high school students, college student volunteers who don't have the teaching experience
Right.
to be put in a situation where they need the most teaching experience. You're working with these kids who need the most expert teachers. So yes, there are high school and college students that want to volunteer, but you want to harness their efforts in a different way, maybe with a different group, maybe with your high achieving students that want to do extension activities or project-based learning who want to do maybe enrichment kind of things. So harness that energy, but in a different way. And then when thinking about your 4 different learning groups, and I have been a classroom teacher, I understand how difficult it is and how completely unrealistic it is to be staying up till 2 a.m.
Right.
prepping for all these different classes night after night after night. There are a lot of professional develop opportunities for teachers right now using AI like ChatGPT or similar that can use the standards and the specific lessons that the teachers want to teach and provide completely automated, differentiated instruction lessons for those groups and for individual students. I met with a wonderful CEO yesterday, Ian Zhu of Schooljoy, and he's created this platform where the teachers are not realistically expected to create all these lessons, but rather you use a student profile, and the student profile has the previous student assessments in their database, and then OpenAI, with the help of this interface from Schooljoy, will basically create the lesson for the individual learner at their level. So these are the kinds of things where we can leverage technology in a huge way. I think it is going to be a huge boon for the future for kids to be able to get that kind of support. We're not replacing teachers, but we're giving them some of those tools that they literally there's been no way that they could provide 30 different lesson plans, and now they can.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Over the weekend, Jesse, I was actually listening to NPR, and I believe the founder of Khan Academy, Salman Khan, I think is
Yeah,
his
that's
name,
right.
was speaking on How I Built This, about how AI can be used, particularly in tutoring. Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead,
and this is
Jesse.
that's a perfect example where Khan Academy had exclusive access to ChatGPT prior to the public release. So they were really able to do a deep dive and create a very good user interface for the student where they're able to basically, for the common user experience, you're interacting not directly with ChatGPT or with OpenAI, but you are able to have a little bit of a filter so that instead of the student just getting the answers, Khan Academy is providing those prompts
Right.
behind the curtain to say, we want you to teach this to the student. We want this to be didactic. We want to use the Socratic method. We want you to come back and ask questions of the student, ask them like, where do you see the problem in this sentence? Where do you see the error in your mathematical equation? So that it's really teaching rather than just giving the answer. Now, going a step further, I mean, that is just like out of the gate, right? And that is
Right.
huge. But going to the next level where that's just interacting, but you're not putting any student data in. That's just interacting like you hop on the website and you're interacting
Mhm.
immediately. If you have built a student profile that has quantitative data, narrative assessments, teacher reports, these are language processing models that are able to quickly look at all that text. PDF documents are perfect. They can look at all the narrative teacher comments, looking at what the student's interested in, areas of growth, continued areas of challenge, and then the AI can create lessons specifically for that student.
So, Jesse, to just leave on this note, two very quick questions. One, is there anything that you want our listeners to know that I didn't ask? And where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, first of all, it's been a pleasure talking with you, wide-ranging topics, and I have a lot of hope for the future in terms of what is available now to students, both with technology and with just people generally wanting to help students, and AARP as an example, Boys and Girls Club, other nonprofits. So people can reach me in 3 different ways. tutorcorps.com. We also have our school, pacificpreparatory.com, and we also have a nonprofit 501c3 foundation that provides free tutoring scholarships for under-resourced kids, and that's tutorcorpsfoundation.org.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, John. Really a pleasure.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.